let's see. Let me just do this. Hey, everybody. It's me, JJ Panzer, your smart apartment advisor, back with another weekly client call talking about all things San Francisco real estate and apartment buildings in particular. It is just another week in San Francisco. We have lots to talk about. I'm going to start by sharing some more data that John shared with me about our lease renewals with existing tenants who asked for reductions. And then we can talk in greater detail about the proposal for a rent registry that is probably still in front of the Budget and Finance Committee at the Board of Supervisors. Talk a little bit about what that means, and it was in my bulletin from earlier this week. And then Josh is going to give us, I want to talk to Denise a little bit more about that. And then I'm going to have a chat with Josh. We'll talk about some data that he sees about from CBRE related to recovery in the industry. So be a good call. Let me start by switching over to the data that we have about lease renewals. You know, one of the other things that we've had going on this year as a result of the rapidly falling rents and the complete loss of any demand from outside people coming into San Francisco is that a lot of times people look around and go, well, gee, you know, you have another unit in my building that's renting for less, and now I want a reduction. And so I ran a little bit of data on this, and we had about 39 units that asked for rent reductions in exchange for renewals of leases of various terms. You know, in the past, I have only written leases for 12 months, sometimes for a little bit longer. At this time of year, I might renew leases for 18 months when tenants want a reduction as a way of making sure that I don't end up with another vacancy in the wintertime next year. And this year, the renewals are all over the board, as short as 6 months and as long as 12, some are 9 and 10 months. It's kind of a grab bag on these 39 units. And there were also an additional 10 units that John mentioned to me they started the conversation and never finished it, meaning that they ended up, you know, deciding they didn't want to make any commitments whatsoever and either continued paying the same rent or didn't sign a new lease and got a reduction anyway, or just decided to move out. And so the upshot of all this is that we had 5 of those 39 units were willing to sign a new lease in exchange for a 1-month free rent deal, which is the old fashioned, but 34 of those 39 said, no, not doing that, and signed lease rent reductions of an average of 12.15%, which, you know, that's more than a month's rent. So that's about a month and a half. 8.33%, of course, would be 1 month's free rent. Some of these were as high as 24% reductions on the renewals. I had some clients who were so reluctant to deal with a vacancy in the current climate that they, you know, allowed themselves to be talked into very, very large rent decreases. And, you know, as a result of the current situation and everything, you know, tenants are free to request their reductions, but, you know, when things improve and rents go up again, we're not going to be able to claw back any of this rent really in any meaningful way in the future, which is, you know, that's just how things go in San Francisco. If it benefits the tenants, it is an okay thing. If it benefits the landlords, it is not an okay thing. But that, you know, it's kind of amazing to see just where this went. The lowest reduction that we had was just a little over 4%. And that unit, you know, we're talking about just a couple of $100 reduction on a $4,000 per month unit. And interestingly, on some of these smaller reductions, it looks like we're dealing with non-rent controlled units, units that are built after 1979, that are not subject to the San Francisco rent ordinance. And so, you know, those clients, those owners are free to you know, raise the rent beyond the San Francisco mandated minimum rent increase. But what interests me more is the direction that we're going with regard to this rent registry proposal that is being heard probably still in front of the rent board or the the Budget and Finance Committee at the Board of Supervisors right now. And you know what's interesting about this is that you know, as I was when in the old days, you know, pre-COVID, before all of these restrictions were put into place, and it wasn't safe to do something like go down to City Hall to speak out in public comment during a hearing for a piece of legislation. You know, lots of people would go down there and you'd sit around, you'd wait, you'd take your turn, you'd go up and you'd have 2 minutes to speak and then you could leave. And you could tell when you went into the board chambers, you could see the supervisors there and you could tell when they were paying attention to you. And you could tell when they were talking to their staff, and you could tell when they were talking to each other, and you could tell when they were on their phones or their computers, and you got a sense of what was going on. And it's really quite clear on a conference call that nobody is paying attention except to shut you down when you've gotten to the end of what should have been 2 minutes, and at the last minute was reduced to a single minute per speaker. And I called in this afternoon. It started at 11 and then it was postponed for a little while. And thankfully, or not thankfully, I was working on actual property management, doing my job this morning, and didn't get back to my desk until almost 12:30, and thought, man, maybe this is over. No, it had been delayed, and I called in, and the phone call said that there was something like 70 people listening and 14 people in the queue. And I put myself into the queue, said my piece. It probably took 30 minutes, but it's obvious that nobody's paying attention. This is like taking your turn to scream into the void. The comments were, I don't know, I think 65% against and 35% in favor. And the comments in favor simply said, we're having a housing crisis and we need more information. There was no like discussion of what information you really need and why it's worth the increased bureaucracy at the rent board, why it's worth the increased cost. I mean, in order to increase the staffing to be able to maintain this rent registry, there have been estimates that the rent board would need to expand by 31 staff members and seek new office space, which are huge expenses. And it's a tremendous increase of the bureaucracy, especially for the rent board, which is a bureaucracy that is supported entirely by fees generated by the units that it regulates. So our rent board fee is going to have to probably triple in order to be able to, Denise, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute yourself. There you are. Denise, go ahead. There you are.
I just got a notice across my phone while you were speaking, JJ, that it did pass.
Yes, of course. We knew that it would. That's why I characterized it as taking my turn to scream into the void.
And I think, you know, there's no more discussion, and here we are.
It's just going to happen. And there really is nothing more to say about it. It doesn't go into effect until June of 2022, which gives us 18 months to be surprised by the machinations and the completely unfair things that come out of this. I'm sure, including the fact that the landlord will bear the entire cost of the rent board fee from here on out. Denise, what do you think of, do you think that there's any chance that we're sharing this rent board fee with the tenants?
No, not as identified, but what will happen is there's inevitably going to be a legal challenge to it.
Okay.
Because unless that there is some sort of nexus with respect to getting information from landlords and being able to charge fees for that which you should freely be able to proceed with, taking into consideration you pay rent revenue, you pay taxes on the revenue, there's no justification and for this process other than to get into the business of a landlord. And there are so many other ways that they can do it. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's as was put in the bulletins that I got from our various landlord groups. I mean, it's an audacious play by two lame duck supervisors. This whole thing, this proposal was introduced on election day, and everybody else was a little bit occupied with other things. And the customary 30-day wait for everybody to discuss the agreements and the legislation was completely shelved, and it was fast-tracked in here. And the whole process was clearly trying to subvert any public, input and any comments from either side. And our Board of Supervisors has a veto-proof majority on legislation like this. So it's just terrible. And so Denise, I think requesting information is all well and good, but I can see lots of ways that the city, that our supervisors will find to push past some of the norms of our industry, and the rights to privacy and to make our own decisions. What kinds of things do you think we're going to have as necessary outcroppings of this, ways that the supervisors would be able to use this to abridge all of our rights as property owners?
Well, inevitably, they're going to use it for further restrictions on landlords, whether it be increases of rent or negation of valid evictions. Their world is their oyster,
right.
And they'll be able to utilize, and this is assuming that there's good information going in, garbage in, garbage out is what
right.
The concern is. And so if landlords don't want to necessarily comply legitimately, and or tenants balk at private information being disclosed, both sides, both ways, and there's no real clear evidence as to the rationale behind it. And that's what's very disconcerting and disturbing, and inevitably fodder for legal challenge.
So given that there are other jurisdictions in the state of California that have registries, is this ordinance a significantly more onerous ordinance that crosses more lines, or is the very concept of a registry just a legal allowable thing? I mean, how do you see this as
more onerous?
Yeah, more onerous, or is it possible to challenge this? What do you think the next steps are going to be?
Well, first of all, we'll need to see the final legislation.
Okay.
Depending upon what they will take back now and have any changes to. I don't know if the city attorney has approved it yet. Inevitably, what will happen is that based on the discussion, if any, today, they will pass it on, and then the city attorney will get a hold of it, and there may be changes. But the reality is that we're such a highly populated, tenant-occupied county,
right,
that that's the concern, is that it will be so pro information for the supervisors that are elected by the tenants to utilize the information, not necessarily in a landlord's or property owner's best interest. That's the concern. As everything is anti-landlord. So not everything, but I'd say 95% of it.
Well, but it's with an effort toward giving the government more information that they can use to manipulate the housing market, because they're calling it a crisis. But what it really is a manufactured crisis, because they haven't allowed for enough construction of housing at all income levels, and therefore it gives them more political power. And the fact of the matter is, for each one of us who lives in San Francisco, and many of us do not live and vote in San Francisco on this call, for each one of us who lives and votes in San Francisco, we have 3 to 12 or 15 or 20 additional votes in our buildings that drown out anything we have to say. And nobody looks at property owners and people that they view as having more money than them as being a vulnerable minority. But for the purposes of this, we have absolutely no voice, and it isn't going to get any better anytime soon. It's really difficult to it's really difficult to comply. I mean, I think about it from the perspective of just my being able to comply with this on my client's behalf. I have to charge for the time it's going to take to generate all this paperwork, or give my clients the chance to do their own filings on a regular basis. It's going to be a tremendous amount of work to comply with the amount of information that they have. And then there's the greater concerns about the rent hostility that is engendered by having a publicly searchable database, where the tenant on the 3rd floor can find out that the person who just moved in, or the person who's lived on the 5th floor for the last 20 years, pays a quarter of the rent that they do, and they have a better unit, and they there's there's no justice in having that be available for people to be able to, stare at their neighbors with a sideways glance and resent them for having lived there for 20 years.
Right.
And it's really, I think it's problematic on a lot of different levels. And, nobody's going to make our board of supervisors listen to anything that the people who operate the housing have to say, because I think the bottom line is that they don't think we have a right to operate rental housing as a for-profit enterprise.
Correct.
Bert, go ahead.
Thanks. Is the big thing there, are they going after vacancy control with this? I mean, the whole thing with last paid rent for that unit, time of vacancy, and then when it hits the market, it seems like they're trying to pick up some data to support vacancy control rates.
Well, absolutely. There's no doubt. Vacancy control is always going to be on the ballot.
Yeah.
I understand now that the gentleman who was backing Prop 21 is now going to go after the Ellis Act. So that's an issue. So there's going to be inevitable issues. And there's also, just as an example, Joshua, you brought up, and JJ too, brought up the fact that there is information that will maybe suggest that there's not standard operating procedure by the landlord or the property manager, because why are you giving this guy a break and not me? So then there's always the lack of information and the lack of understanding as to the rationale behind the ordinance. But what was really interesting, what you just said, JJ, as you can well imagine, there's such a vast majority of employees in San Francisco County that are not necessarily occupants here. And I have a colleague who was approached by a gentleman who is convinced that some of the power of the politicians in San Francisco is purposely being identified via the tenants that these city officials are agreeing to employ, which basically means is that if you're a public official, you're going to hire San Francisco residents because they will vote for what the politician wants to have passed,
Right.
because it's in their best interest.
Right.
And taking into consideration how many employees work for the city and county of San Francisco, it's a fascinating conspiracy theory.
Right.
And I wonder how true it is. So, if you're voting for your own self-interest, it's never going to be a fair battle.
Right. Right. Bert, did you have a comment, a question?
Yeah, I had two. On top of what Joshua said, what worries me about the vacancy is that it offers an opportunity if somebody is vacant for a while, that people can find out where those are and take adverse possession, and
Right.
camp in them, like as that happened over in Oakland. You've got the possibility of that, and then you're going to have to end up doing possibly what was done there, where the owner just sold it, got rid of it, turned over to the city of Oakland, and they're occupying it. So I'm very concerned about having an easy list of places that are vacant, that are open with that. The other thing I wanted to comment, as someone who sits on a government board, I don't find it very easy with the 1 to 2 minute comments, but I do read all the letters, and I think letters are more functional in
Right.
getting a point across. And because for one thing, it's read by the staffs, and the staff can tag those things that have different ideas and concepts and stuff like that forward to the supervisor. So I would suggest, rather than sitting through hours to give 5 minutes, or 2 minutes or 1 minute, send a letter.
Right. Well, that was part of the instructions, given by the Apartment Association and the Coalition for Better Housing, was to email every one of the supervisors on the budget committee, email the clerk of the budget committee, email your district supervisor, and then show up to give the comments, because I think it's inevitable, it's natural when you are when you're listening to the public comments to sort of count the yeses and the nos. And I'm not sure that there really is any effect to participating in the public comments. It feels like a necessary detail that they require, but that nobody cares about. But at the same time, when when a piece of legislation goes forward and every single speaker is against it, it sort of shows just the level of care and concern that people have. And, you know, I felt like every single every negative comment against this legislation had specific reasons why. And some of it sounded like, you know, personal sour grapes. I don't want to do this, and this hurts my personal best interest. And some of it was a little bit, you know, stop doing this to me, and this is all, you know, communist this and socialist that. But the reasons for supporting it were just so vague. It's like, we need more information. No, you don't need all this information. Give me a break. Let's talk about what you're doing with it. Because, for example, Bert, I think your point about, you know, sort of the nexus of understanding where the vacancies are and then connecting that with, oh, all these people who can come in and be squatters in these vacant units to try to take over buildings, you know, that's frightening, right? And that's another way, in addition to like the COPA legislation that requires us to make apartment buildings available to the qualified nonprofit organizations before they're available for sale on the general public. You know, it's the slope toward all housing being operated by the government of San Francisco. That's the goal. That is the end goal of all of this, is to eradicate our business entirely.
Yeah, just one last comment to what you said. Last week on the Golden Gate Bridge, all the speakers spoke in terms that would be supporting increase in bridge tolls to keep the union, the employees on pretty much 100%. But if you went out and checked in other places, almost everybody objected to the increase in tolls. So the people who wait in line to speak do not necessarily represent very well the general public view.
Right. Well, that's yeah, that's all very interesting and a big concern. This is the Board of Supervisors that our tenants have elected. You know, I fill out my ballot dutifully every time, knowing that it's, you know, not going to make a difference, but it's my duty, as I learned in civics classes and as a scout and all that kind of stuff. So that's our lives. Anyway, well, thank you, Denise. Thank you, Bert. Thank you, everybody, for your comments on that topic. I want to turn this over to Josh. Josh, why don't you go ahead and give us the update on the market after that depressing news. Sorry to have you follow me in that way. Are you ready? There we go.
Yep.
Cool. Yep. Got it.
All right. So I came across some data put together by CBRE, and this is national data, 2021 U.S. real estate market outlook for multifamily. And I found it pretty interesting what they were saying. This information takes into account the developments on vaccines. And so, you know, looking at when we're going to recover is obviously very much tied to when these vaccines are readily available for everybody. And so I'll just kind of go through some of this. The first paragraph here, actually second paragraph here, they're forecasting pre-COVID vacancy levels and a 6% increase in net effective rents next year. So actually they're seeing an increase in rents with full market recovery occurring in early 2022. So 2021 is going to be pretty bumpy. You know, in particular, the first quarter, I think it's going to be similar to what we're experiencing now. The rebound will include what they're calling over here unbundling, which I thought was an interesting term right here. Certain renters moving out of their parents' homes or those of friends as job opportunities provide more financial flexibility to live independently. So as COVID wanes, people are going to start moving back. They're forecasting they're going to move back into 2-bedroom apartments or 1-bedroom apartments and back out of their parents' homes and back into the city. And they're projecting that those things will will certainly be occurring in the next year. The one thing, you know, they're saying demand levels for multifamily will still fall short of pre-COVID peaks in 2018 and 19, but should rise significantly from 2020. That doesn't mean much to us because 2020 is so awful, but up is better than down. So we need to come, you know, quite a bit up. The next, what they talked about here was also interesting. Class A apartments had the highest impact. They were hurt the most in COVID. So people, which we've seen, you know, I consider a lot of product in San Francisco to be Class A. People fled. They left these apartments. They moved out, as we all know. And Class B actually was quite stable. So this is more middle class housing. You didn't see as much movement in the Class B space. Class C space really collapsed as well. So those are a lot of people who lost jobs and a lot of non-payment issues as opposed to fleeing their units. Just you had more eviction problems and non-payment issues in the Class C space, but in the Class A space, people scrammed, and then Class B was actually more stable. So here's some interesting kind of takes on how we're going to recover. They're expecting office occupancy to increase in 2021. But the whole thing with urban amenities and all these things that we all miss doing in our personal lives, those things are, they're saying 80 to 90% return by the end of 2021. So over the course of 2021, you're going to see like a steady increase in this restaurant in your neighborhood is going to be open, which wasn't open last month, and this and that, up to 80 to 90% by the end of 2021. So we're still a long way out from full recovery. Same thing for public transport, public transit. The big move everybody knows about, many renters have left urban spaces to go to suburban spaces, looking for more space, more outdoor space. Again, is the amenities in cities open back up, office space open back up? All these folks are projecting that, you know, we'll see an increase back into urban space. However, they are saying that there could be some long-term impacts in terms of people who have kind of left an urban setting, may, you know, all of a sudden they're 33, 34, 35, whatever. And they say, well, I don't really want to go back into a dense city. Maybe I want to stay in a more suburban setting. So there is some concern over kind of net loss of people out of cities, but not massive, not like a collapse of the cities. They're projecting additional investment in so the purchasing of apartment buildings. The projecting, so this figure here, this chart here is very interesting. So 2021 is supposed to be a lot better than 2020 in terms of overall investment, but you see how much further below it is 2019. So 2019, there's $191 billion in transactions in multifamily. In 2020, we're at 111. And then 2021, we're projected to jump up to 148, but that's still a big dip from where we were 2018, 2019. So it's better. There should be more money. Again, so much investor money is on the sidelines. So much unknown related to the vaccines. Like I've been reporting about San Francisco when I'm looking at the market. I mean, things are just kind of sitting and people are poking around and trying to sell buildings and they're not moving. And, you know, so much of it is related to this pandemic, right? And so, but they are forecasting an uptick in overall sales up to that $148 billion number. So So it's good. You know, these forecasts are good, but it's still going to be light comparatively from what we've seen. You know, 148 is down to 2000. It's below 2015 numbers in terms of overall volume. This is also national numbers to take that into consideration. This section was kind of interesting, talking about the various areas that in the country that fared well and the ones that were really hurt. The Midwest actually did pretty well. You didn't see the huge drop in vacancies and
Okay, all right, I got it. Yeah, I'll just wait until Friday. I changed the message so people.
And
Okay,
so,
all right.
but then this bottom paragraph. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead. Sorry, I had to mute everybody.
Yeah, no problem. The most impacted areas in 2020 were San Francisco, right there first on the list, San Jose and New York. Other underperformers included Los Angeles, Boston, Seattle, Oakland, Austin, Miami, Chicago, Washington, DC, and Orlando. All the cities that we love.
All the dense ones.
These are all, these are places that were expensive, highly desirable, great jobs, booming tech sectors, and they've been crushed. And so, but, again, the future is bright. The future is not so bright in the short term, rockier in the midterm, bright in the long term in terms of kind of a full recovery. So I thought this was kind of an interesting take on the national market, and just to give, I wanted to see some multifamily analysis as it relates to this vaccine, right? And so if we're thinking this vaccine is going to be widely distributed March, April, May of next year, how does that relate to investment? And with these guys, in this group of analysts, they're saying it's directly related. I mean, nothing happens until we get this pandemic under control. So anyway.
That's pretty interesting to see that graph show that the investment went from 191 billion to 111 billion, so that it's clear that investment went down by quite a bit,
right?
And to see it go down by 81 billion dollars there, it's going to go up by 33%. Well, when you're going from 111 to 148 billion dollars, yeah, that's a 33% increase, but you're still way off of what it was. Even back in 2015, you're still $3 billion off of that. So the market's being knocked back 5 years in its growth.
Right. And just think, the lockdowns happened in March.
Right.
So we had most of the first quarter unaffected by COVID.
Right.
So most of that drop is in actually a 6-month period, because there was deals still closing when it all started. So, I mean, the second half of this year, it's just been clever.
Yeah, it's pretty tough times, but I'm not sure what to think about the vaccine yet. It's good that it exists. It's a little unclear what exactly it is, because the scientific papers haven't been completely published yet, it seems, or that's what I'm hearing. And that they're saying they could have 50 million doses, which is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket, manufactured by the end of this year. And then it has to be distributed. And, they're talking about, was it 100 million more by the end of next year or something like that. But, we're looking at trying to share it among 7 billion people in this world, and, do it in a fair way. It's a big challenge. That is a big challenge. So we will see. We will see.
I think it's just going to be a slow thaw of the market, and it's not going to be overnight. It's going to,
it's going to be very slow. It's going to be a very slow thaw. And I think about I saw a report that said that the Warriors, they're starting their next season at the end of December, and they're talking about wanting to have 50% capacity with COVID testing for every fan in attendance for 72 games. And so you're talking about 10,000 people and per game with testing for each person at the door. And it's going to cost them $30 million to provide the testing to be open, which, that $30 million cost is the cost of doing business, even with a half open stadium.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And that's an indoor stadium. I'm sure they have the air circulation methods, but that's the stuff people want to be in San Francisco for is, gee, I get to go, take public transit to get to a game. Well, there's no game and there's no public transit. How do you like that?
Right. Yep.
So.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. It's, I can't even find a swimming pool to go to. I'm a swimmer, and just like, oh yeah.
Yeah, you're suffering.
That's why I swim in the bay.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about the Class ABC, property and how the market really pounded the Class A, which is obvious. I mean, it has the farthest to decline. And I'm not sure, maybe the rents didn't go down by as much, but I'm not sure that, I wonder if their survey includes data on unpaid rent from tenants that stayed in possession of their units during that time. Because the fact of the matter is that even if rents didn't go down, you still have a massive loss in rent, which is probably more significant among your, especially your C class, blue collar working class tenants.
Yeah, that's what they said. That's where the problem was with delinquencies was in the Class C, and whereas Class A, they just left.
Yeah. And so our experience in RMC has been that our better renovated, nicer units tend to rent faster, because we're more competitive at even if it's a reduced rent, our clients appreciate the fact that the place gets rented. And the unrenovated units, with the 70s or 80s kitchens that have Formica countertops and, pink tile bathrooms, they just don't rent. They don't rent at all. And so it is, it's a challenge.
Yep.
It's a challenge. I'm going to stop the screen share here. And yeah, well, thank you for that. And happy to open it up if anybody has questions or comments or wants to revisit any of the topics we've discussed so far. But it's good to see you all, and I'm glad you joined us. And we'll have to see how the sausage gets made from here with this legislation, because it's a doozy. And I can't say I didn't see this coming for a few years now, but the way it's happened is a bit of a shock and definitely a concern. So we'll see what happens. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Take care, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. Not doing a call next week for the holiday. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope it's quiet and you still get to eat lots of good food. So talk to you later. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. See ya. Bye.